Welcome to the Sports Spectrum Podcast, where faith and sports collide. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This is episode number 19 of the Sports Spectrum Podcast. My name is Jason Romano. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program. As always, you can subscribe and you can listen and download the podcast on iTunes, on Google Play, everywhere podcasts are found. SportsSpectrum.com as well has all of our podcasts, and just grateful and thankful to have you joining us and listening to the show. We really appreciate your feedback as well. You can leave a review on iTunes. Let us know what you think of the podcast. When you leave a review, it does help get the word out to more people through the Apple iTunes podcast app, but also just hearing from you and your feedback on the show. How can we get better? What type of guests? Who should we have on? Who should we be interviewing here on the program? And what can we do to make it better, to get better, to improve on it? Because that's really what the goal here is to do, is to continue to improve each and every episode, not only with the style, the interviews, the questions that we're asking, but the guests that we're having. And we've had some incredible guests. I mean, just incredible here on the podcast so far. And we've recently passed 35,000 downloads, which has been incredible. And I'm not one to celebrate numbers too much, but just kind of putting a number to what we're doing here and the amount of people that have been impacted and reached through this podcast has been incredible. So thank you so much for being a part of all that we're doing here on the program. All right, today's guest is featured in the latest edition, the summer edition of Sports Spectrum magazine, which is out now. And we'll talk about the magazine, and we'll talk more about what's inside the new edition of Sports Spectrum magazine on the back end of this interview. But our guest today is Ryan Hall. He is a graduate of Stanford University, a 2008 and 2012 Olympic long distance runner. He won the 2008 marathon at the United States Olympic Trials, and he's also done some really great things in the community. He's formed the Hall Steps Foundation in 2009 to empower the running community to use the energy and resources that fuel runners' athletic achievements for social justice efforts. He's also married to his college girlfriend, Sarah, who is also a professional runner, and he's the fastest American marathoner ever. That's 26.2 miles in a marathon here we're talking about, and he is the fastest one ever to do it. He's also adopted 4 children from Ethiopia. So Ryan Hall is a busy guy right now, but he's got an amazing story, an amazing journey, and we're happy to bring it to you here on the Sports Spectrum Podcast. Here is episode number 19 of the podcast with Ryan Hall. Ryan, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, Ryan. And there's so much to talk about with you. I think your journey and your story is amazing. But I want to start more current, I guess, and start with your final marathon. It took place earlier this year. I've talked to many elite athletes in my life who've always wanted to retire sort of on their own terms. You know, when you see the guys like Peyton Manning and John Elway going out on their terms, winning a Super Bowl. For you and your terms, instead of one race, you decided to take part in 7 marathons. Am I right on that? In 7 days on 7 continents? It's like, what? And I mean, that's crazy. Tell us about how this all came to be.
Yeah, that is kind of a funny story because you're right. Like, I always envisioned retiring a certain way. And for me, how I envisioned that taking place was finishing my last marathon, getting to the finish line, and, hopefully like winning the race or running really fast or running really well, ending on a high note, getting the finish line, take my shoes off, leave them on the finish line, and walk away barefoot and never lace them up again for a race. So, but the way things ended up, I just was battling with fatigue issues and injury after injury. This went on for like 4 years' time. So it became very clear to me that my body was telling me I've had enough and you need to start giving back to me. I've been giving to you for 20 years of running. Like, how about you give me something in return? So I did that, decided to retire, and, but my last race wasn't a good race. I didn't leave my shoes on the finish line. I didn't know it was going to be my last race. So there was kind of a little bit of like unclosure to the process for me. And then, 3 months into retirement, I'm in the weight room. I got super into weightlifting because what I've found in retirement is, who you are doesn't change. And like, I love to push myself physically. So I just needed to find a new way to do that, in a way in which I was going to be building my body up, making it stronger, rather than running. And endurance stuff tends to be pretty hard on your body and even catabolic in nature, where it's tearing your body down. So, anyways, I was in the weight room doing some weights, and my buddy, who's the pastor at the Dream Center in Los Angeles, he's an amazing pastor, and they're doing amazing work down there. I've gotten to speak at their church, and I'm just like a big fan of his ministry. And his name is Pastor Matthew Barnett, and he texted me, and he's like, "Hey, I'm doing this crazy challenge next year, 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents." And my head just started to spin. I'm like, is that even possible? Like, can you even get to all those locations in a week? And something about it just like captured me. And it was actually kind of cool because how I got into the sport of running is I used to hate to run. And then I was into baseball, basketball, and football. And then one day, like when I was 13, going around the lake in my hometown in Big Bear Lake, California, God kind of gave me this crazy desire to go out on this epic run that would be my first run I'd ever done. 13 years old, basketball player, and I ran 15 miles around the lake with my dad. And it was super hard, super painful, but from that moment on, like I went from a kid who hated to run to a kid who was just like training all out for trying to bring out whatever was inside me, whatever God had put in there. So it's kind of the same deal with this, where like I wasn't running at all. Like I was back to like hating running, like how I mentioned how it ended was not how I pictured it.
Right.
And so I was literally in the weight room, got this text, but it's kind of that same feeling of like, whoa, like I feel like God's like giving me this desire to actually want to do this, which sounded crazy because you don't not run and then just sign up for something like that.
Right, but there's a desire that God gives us, and then there's 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents. I don't know about that desire, Ryan.
Yeah, I don't know, but for some reason, like it really did capture me. And then also, we were raising support and awareness for the Dream Center
Right.
through this challenge. So that was equally big part of why I wanted to do the challenge. And so I didn't really train for it. I'm still into weightlifting. I weigh like 50 pounds more now than I weighed when I was running competitively. So a completely different body now. And but I went and slugged it out 7 marathons in a row. It was an amazing trip. I'm super glad I did it. Made lifelong friends. But I definitely never want to do that again. But yes, when I got to when I got to Australia, I already had a stress fracture in my hip, which I would learn was a stress fracture, later when I came home and got an MRI. But I ran like a 5.5 hour marathon, which for me, my personal best is 2 hours and 4 minutes. So being out there for 5 hours running was completely new experience for me. And so when I got to that finish line, I took the shoes off and left them there. And I was actually kind of surprised because I felt like I was getting kind of emotional, and I wasn't expecting to be emotional. I thought it was just gonna be kind of like a small little gesture at the end of my marathoning, but it was actually like a really kind of special way for me to actually bring that sense of closure to my career and being able to move on now into the next season of my life.
That's pretty awesome. We're talking to Ryan Hall, Olympic long distance runner. He was in the Olympics in 2008 and 2012. Now, let me just ask you really quick before we move on from this 7 days, 7 marathons, 7 continents. So, just to recap, Antarctica, Chile, Miami, Madrid, Morocco, Dubai, Sydney, Australia. Just give me a snapshot of 7 days, how you're getting to these places, what a day is like. Listen, people train for months upon end to get and just run one marathon, and you're doing it in 7 days. And I know obviously you're not trying to compete and win an Olympic gold medal here. Take me through the process of each day, how you're getting to the next place. Are you jumping on a plane every day? Like, what's this process like?
Yeah, so it starts out in Antarctica because that's the one place where the weather is obviously very variable. So you don't want to put that on day 6 and be like, oh, we're delayed 2 days, and then you can't do the challenge, you know?
Right.
So you do that one first, which that was probably my favorite one. You know, we're like sleeping in tents, the sun never goes down, just like a stunning scenery around you with mountains shooting up all over the place, and really cool to like run on a snowpack trail for 10K. We just did four loops plus a little bit on it. And then we hopped straight onto an airplane like a couple hours after we finished running, and that was kind of the protocol. Like we'd have 6 to 8 hours to finish the race and get back on an airplane. So like I would finish in most of my marathons were somewhere in the neighborhood of 3.5 hours, give or take. And so I would actually go to the weight room because like I said, I'm super into weights. So they'd have day hotels for us where we could shower, clean up before we get on the airplane.
Yeah.
But I'd go and use the hotel gym, and actually I found it helped me kind of recover, getting a little blood flow going in the gym. But yeah, we only slept. We had 2 nights in a hotel over the course of the entire week. So it was interesting because I was like, man, I'm gonna watch like 60 movies this week being on the airplane that much. But I did not watch one movie because my time zone was when I was on the plane, I was sleeping, and when I wasn't on the plane, I was running or doing weights. So it actually I felt pretty good at the end of the week, except for like I said, I got a stress fracture in my hip, and that really put a downer on the last couple days. I got that on day 5 in Morocco.
Hmm.
But yeah, you're just sleeping on the plane. Luckily, we had a private chartered plane that was business class, so they made it easy on us. They do a great job of putting on this event. There was 30 other people who were doing this challenge as well, and it's just open to the general public. Richard Donovan puts the event on, and he does a great job with it. So, we had every advantage we could possibly have, but it was still, quite an epic week for everyone.
I gotta imagine. Now, let me just ask you on a just a general level. I tried running. I would go jogging 3, 4 miles. I completed a 5K, and I thought it was the greatest accomplishment I've ever had because I just hated running. So I stopped it. I didn't enjoy it at all. So I just go for walks now. So I enjoy walking. There's no pain, and it's just I don't know. That's for me, but for you, running your whole life, and I just want to ask you from a very general perspective, what type of pain are you in after you compete in a marathon and complete it? Not the 7 marathons in 7 days. That's got to be a whole different level. But even just like what, just a general race or like a Boston Marathon type thing. What type of pain are you in after you're finished running a marathon?
Yeah, it's pretty intense. We train super hard for this. So actually, like when you see most elite runners finish, you can tell like they've gone to the well, they're completely maxed out. But we'll actually come back from it like fairly easily. Like I usually take 2 weeks off completely after a marathon. Because we've trained, I'll do 26-mile runs and training just leading up to it, like 2 or 3 of them before the actual marathon. So it's nothing new to us to push ourselves for that long, but it hurts every single time. And it doesn't matter how fit you get, because the fitter you get, the harder you're able to run. That's the good part about getting fit is you can run faster and harder for longer. So like I remember being at mile 20 of the Boston Marathon and just having this thought in my mind being like there's got to be a easier way to make a living than this. Like just
I
you know
agree. I agree.
you're in pain when your forearms start hurting. That was always like the last thing is like once my forearms start giving out, I know I'm close to the end of my energy.
I can't imagine. We're talking to Ryan Hall. He is the Olympic long distance runner in 2008 and 2012. And I want to go back a little bit, Ryan. Let's go back to the days of when it first started for you, Ryan Hall, the runner. You mentioned earlier you were 13, I think you said, and you went and ran 15 miles with your dad. But tell us about growing up. I know your dad was drafted by the Baltimore Orioles. Baseball was your first love. So when did running really take shape for you? Was it that time that you explained earlier, running 15 miles, or kind of how did that grow and gravitate into this passion that you had?
Yeah, it really was. From the moment that I went on that 15-mile run, I remember coming back, collapsing collapsing on the couch in my living room. And again, like, and these were probably the first two times that I really felt like God was putting something on my heart and giving me vision and desire, was when he told me to go on the run, and then when I got back from the run. And I really felt like he was telling me, like, I've given you a gift to run with the best guys in the world, and I've given you that gift so you can help other people. And so, like, from that moment on, like, I went and I was fully going after living out that vision that God had put in my life. And that was super powerful for me, because I went through some really, really tough times at Stanford, where I dropped out for a quarter of my winter of my sophomore year at Stanford. And, you go through so many bad races, injuries. Like, the road to the Olympics is filled with failures, and you have to learn to pick yourself up over and over and over again. So it's really important in those moments when you do have to pick yourself up, that you remember what you're going after, what your vision is. More importantly, what's the vision God's given you for why you're doing what you're doing. You fall back on that, and then you're able to get back up.
Describe when your faith journey began, Ryan.
So I was super blessed. I grew up in a Christian home, but really, like, it all kind of started for me personally, and I really started growing a lot when I started running. So, running and my faith have always been really closely intertwined. I can't really separate the two, because I felt like God, gave me this desire to run. And then not only that, but when I started running, my whole lifestyle shifted. I went from a kid who was trying to fit in with the cool kids that would go on to be partying and drinking and doing all those things that, kids who were a little bit lost in high school end up falling into. And I could have very easily followed that same exact path. That was the direction I was going on. And then started running, and actually the first thing that happened was I lost all my friends, because I wasn't doing the same things my friends were doing anymore, and I was super into running, and which was it made me feel very lonely at first, but it was actually a really necessary thing to have happen.
That's such an
And
influential time, though, Ryan, in high school when you're trying to fit in. And I know God, carried you, but like, describe that. Go a little deeper with that. Losing friends, that didn't want to be around you anymore.
Yeah. So, like, when I was in high school, my dad, he was a teacher at our high school, and I can remember walking through the quad, and everyone's eating lunch with their friends, laughing, having a good time. And I was literally walking to my dad's classroom, and I would eat lunch in his classroom because I, like, didn't have any other friends to eat lunch with.
Hmm.
And, I'm super grateful my dad was there for me and he could be my friend, but I was still, that loneliness, it made me go even deeper into God. I remember having a conversation with God and just being like, I really need you to show up as my friend right now, because I feel super lonely. And he did. And that's really where the relationship grew from, was that kind of starting point of loneliness.
We're talking to Ryan Hall, 2008, 2012 Olympic long distance runner and the fastest American marathoner ever. That's over 26.2 miles a marathoner. And he joins us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. So we go to college. Ryan, you said you were at Stanford and you're competing at Stanford. You earned in your senior year your first ever individual NCAA championship. You win the 5,000 meters, but you said you struggled a little bit in Stanford too. So talk about college life and what that was like for you.
Yeah, college was a whole different world for me. Growing up in a small town, my life was just training, eating, sleeping, school, and that was it. It was super simple. And my mom made really healthy food for us at home, so I didn't have to think about much of anything besides training, sleeping, and eating, and school, of course. And then when I got to Stanford, it's just like I'm getting ready to go to bed at like 9:30 at night, and everyone else is like getting ready to go out, and it's super loud in the dorms. The entire first year of my freshman year, I had an eye twitch because I wasn't able to get enough sleep. So it was just like a shock. And then everything was harder. The academics were way over my head. Athletically, I was struggling. I was getting injured, and things just weren't clicking well at all. Actually, kind of cost our team an NCAA title my freshman year. We ended up losing by just a couple of points, and I ran really bad. If I would have ran as well as I should have, we would have won the NCAA title. So it was kind of like everything kind of came crashing down that freshman year. The bright spot for me was, meeting my wife to be, Sarah. We started dating our first week of freshman year, and really, like, that was kind of the only thing that was going well in my life. And I'm so glad that I had that, because I feel like you have to have some area in life that you're excited about. If it's not athletics, then maybe socially or schoolwork or other hobbies, but something where you can look back and feel like, okay, my life is okay.
So we finished college, and now we're getting close to. Let's just take it to 2007. It's New York City, and you're at the United States Olympic Trials. Now it's getting serious here. We're about to potentially make it to the Olympics, November 3rd, 2007, and you win the Olympic Trials Marathon in a trials record, 2 hours and 9 minutes and 2 seconds, and you qualify for the Olympics. You're going to Beijing. Take me back to that day, that moment. What do you remember most about that day?
Oh, that was living the vision that God gave me when I was a little guy on the couch, running with the best guys in the world. Like, that's immediately what I thought about when I was 13, and God told me that. Like, I thought of the Olympics, like, first thing. So that was always my big goal. So to actually live that, is one of those really special days that, I'll want to go back into heaven and relive that one again for sure. Because it was not only a great race, but it was also the most spiritual run I've probably ever had in my life, where I could really feel God's presence in a really strong way, and
What does that
just
mean? Take
magical.
me into that a little bit, Ryan. I'm sorry to interrupt you about spiritual, like feeling God's presence in a run. Take me through what that's like.
So probably the best way to describe it is like how you feel in church when you're like deep into worship, like that connection that you feel with God. Um, just the sense of like how loved you are by God,
Mm.
I think, is what I feel. And almost like I would almost get like tingles on like my forearms when I was out running in the Olympic trials, just because like I was really sensing how much God loved me. And so just that just increased the amount of presence that I think I was aware of. I mean, God is with us all the time, but there are certain moments where we're able to lock into that better than others. And for me, that often comes through doing physical activity, whether it's running or weightlifting or whatever. Like, I feel like I can sometimes feel God's presence a lot easier than when I'm, sitting in a room trying to pray. Not that I don't do that or don't think that's good, but sometimes we need to get out and do what God's gifted us to do, and that's how we can experience his presence.
That's awesome. So you're making it to the Olympics. It's 2008, and you're in Beijing. You had the highest of highs, qualifying to get to the Olympics, and then you get to the Olympics and you finish 10th. And I read that in your disappointment, you couldn't even watch a replay of that race for 3 years. What's your recollections of that time?
Yeah. Yeah, I was obviously super bummed, just because when you're competing on that stage in that race that you dreamed about your entire life, like, I'm okay not winning the race, but I want to have my best day ever.
Right.
And it was hard for me not to be firing on all cylinders. And it wasn't for a lack of training or trying or anything. It's just like that's how it is in athletics. Like, some days you're on and some days you're off. And some build-ups for races go extremely well. Everything's clicking, feeling like $1,000,000, running super fast. And then other times you're doing the same exact thing and it's not working and you're not getting faster and you just feel like you're hitting your head against a wall. So it was unfortunately one of those head against a wall experiences for me in Beijing. But it was really a cool experience though, because I'll like never forget doing a warm up in the Olympic Village the day before the marathon, and just asking God, because I like to ask God questions. And I remember just asking him, like, for a word for tomorrow's race. And he kind of put the verse or the story in my mind from the Bible of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Mm.
And so I went back and read the story, And what really struck me was their attitude and their heart towards God. Like they said, like, even if our God doesn't deliver us from these flames that you're about to throw us into, even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down and worship your gods. So, like, they were prepared for God to show up, but they were also prepared for God not to. And it wasn't going to change how much they loved God, how they worship God. I
Right.
feel like that was really important for me going into that race because I had to develop this spirit where I'm going to choose to be unoffendable towards God. Like, I can't bend his arm to show up and do things the way I want him to do it. Like, that's not my job. My job is just to love him and love him as deeply as I can and be thankful for whatever he gives me. So, fast forward into the race, and I was getting bummed out as the race was going on, starting to have a pity party. Why is this happening? How come I'm not feeling good? There's a million things going through your mind. And then I got into the Olympic tunnel, and it was just dead quiet. There's no one else in there. There was no other runners around me. All I hear is the pitter pat of my feet. And I felt like God was telling me, like, this isn't everything that you dreamed of, that you wanted, but it's everything that you need for right now, this time in your life. And that was really kind of a healing moment for me where I could begin to deal with the disappointment of not having my expectations met in the race. And so, with that mindset, ran into the Olympic Stadium, the moment I'd always been dreaming of, running into the Olympic Stadium. Of course, I always dreamed of running in first, not running in 10th place, but
Of course.
I was still able to enjoy, running that last lap around the track. And I remember just looking around and feeling like I was getting to taste a little bit of heaven. You got people from every country in the world sitting, maybe not every country in the world, but many countries
Yeah.
sitting in this stadium packed with people. And you just feel like you're getting a little taste of heaven. And I'm really glad that God got a hold of me in that tunnel so that I could experience that last lap in the way that I always dreamed of experiencing it.
It's interesting how God can kind of speak to us or open our eyes a little bit in our failures, if you will, even though it wasn't a failure. You're at the Olympics, obviously, but you want to finish first and you want to win a
Right.
gold medal. And it's interesting how your relationship in that way can grow deeper with him in the midst of what you would consider a disappointment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same in the physical as in the spiritual. Like the way that you get better at, I don't care if it's weightlifting, baseball, basketball, cycling, running, you get better by stressing your body to the point where it can't go on, where it's failing. And then you step back from that, you let it recover, and then it grows and it gets stronger because you forced it to fail. So I've had to change my mindset towards failure over the years. Be like, actually, failure is what's going to allow me to succeed, and actually developing I'm going to value failure. I'm not going to look at it as a bad thing or as I'm such a failure. Like it's not reflecting on my personality, who I am. It's a necessary part of achieving excellence in our lives.
It's really good. As you continued training, Ryan, for the 2012 Olympics, as we go ahead here in London, there was a point in late 2010 into 2011 where you decided to move on from your coaches and training group. Walk us through why you not only moved on from your coaches, but how you came to then eventually not hiring a coach.
Yeah, so I was at the point in my life where everything was going great. I was the best marathon runner in America, and I was running fast and had the American record in the half marathon. Like everything was perfect, or so you'd think. But I still felt this like lack of like there's nothing I'm desperate for God for at this moment. Like I just have a pretty comfortable, good life, and yeah, like I want him to um, show up more in my running or whatnot. But really, like, there's nothing that's making me fall on my knees every day and pray and be like, I have to hear your voice. So I was like, well, I can change my life to where I'm positioning myself in such a way that I have to be desperate to hear his voice. So I did that, decided to go out on my own and start essentially faith-based coaching where I was asking God how to train every day. And I was an athlete, not a coach, so I wasn't prepared necessarily to coach myself, but I knew that God wanting me to go deeper with him. And it was such a cool process to go through, like it wasn't perfect. Like there were times when I felt like I was hearing something from God and I was just wrong about it.
Mm.
And but that's part of the process. Like when we're trying to learn to hear God's voice, it's not going to be, no one comes out of the womb speaking perfect English. They have to spend a couple of years like fumbling around with it. And then, we develop the skill of being able to speak over time through practice and failure. And it's the same thing with trying to hear God's voice. Like it takes time and practice and not giving up. And even when you blow it and you don't do it properly, don't hear properly, you got to keep going back to him and keep trying to refine your ears so that you're able to hear from him better. So it was really that was the road I was traveling, was learning to hear God's voice. And I certainly did in a lot of ways. And what I found in that process was, nothing great happens in isolation. The first thing God did as I chose to leave my team was to put a whole support team around me, each in kind of their own unique specialties, whether it's a chiropractor, a massage therapist, a nutritionist, like every single area that I needed to be met. Like I had a specialist that was helping me meet that need. So I was immediately surrounded with a great team of people, and I was off and running, and it was pretty cool because my first race, actually my first marathon, since going out on faith-based coaching, was my fastest marathon I ever ran, 2011 Boston Marathon, when I ran 2:04:58. And that was just kind of a really cool day, just because how the race happened. So like once every 10 years in Boston's a point to point course, and about once every 10 years you'll get a tailwind. And when you get a tailwind, obviously you can run way faster than if you have a cross breeze or wind in your face.
Right.
And this just happened to be a tailwind year. And I remember being at mile like 9 in the race and just looking up in the sky and almost like smiling at God, because I literally felt like he was like pushing me along the course. And yeah, it ended up being at the time is the fastest marathon ever run in history. The guys who won ran 2:03, I think 02, and I was a part of that race, and I was with the leaders up until about 20 miles or so. So really kind of a special day. But what I've learned over the years is like we can't judge our relationship with God based on results, because sometimes we're getting closer to God, we're making the right decisions, but the results aren't what we expected. And so I'm learning to look at my life differently and look at results differently and value my connection with God more than the results that can possibly bring.
We're talking to Ryan Hall here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Ryan, I want to go a little deeper in the idea of faith-based coaching and basically having God as your coach. Take us into a moment, or the moment maybe, when you really truly, because you said it took a few years to kind of understand God's voice and responding to that. What does that moment feel like? Where were you? What is that? Just describe that for us.
Well, I wouldn't say there was ever a moment where I felt like, oh, now I got it. I feel like
Right.
I'm still in the process. I'm still learning, still getting it wrong sometimes and getting it right sometimes. Even like right now, like my wife is taking our kids through a process of talking to God every day and writing it down and asking him questions and all this. And like I'm growing through the process. So I don't think it's ever, like in any relationship you have in life, it's always one that is growing. It's either growing or it's not growing,
Right.
depending on if you're willing to invest into the relationship and put in time and work and everything that goes into making a good relationship. But yeah, I felt like, right around the 2012 Olympics, like I was really starting to see like how God was directing me, because he was leading me to do things that I wouldn't typically do. For example, in my training, typically, like I'm really anal about wearing my watch and checking my splits. Every mile has to be run at a certain time for my workouts. My intervals all got to be exactly, the right times I want to run and stuff. And I felt like he was telling me like your watch is your God. It's defining what's good and what's not good.
Hmm.
And so I took off my watch, and I was really struggling in my training. Like things just weren't clicking well at all. And took off my watch, and my results didn't necessarily get better, but my head, my heart, my soul, my spirit, I began to like love running again rather than, feeling so frustrated all the time that I wasn't running as fast as I wanted to be running. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like like I was talking about results. Like the results weren't what I wanted or expected of having God as my coach, but I felt like He helped me weather a storm that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise weather if I were with a more traditional coach. And I certainly don't feel like everyone needs to have God as their coach at some point in their career as a professional athlete or an athlete of any pedigree. But I think we should all position ourselves in such a way where we are desperate to hear God's voice. I feel like that's something that's really, really important and can be lacking in our culture where, we tend to be living pretty comfortable lives and not desperately needing God to show up in some way.
We're talking to Ryan Hall. He is the 2008 and 2012 Olympic long distance runner. And Ryan, I was reading an article, a very long article on you from the New York Times back right before the Olympics in 2012 by Jerry Longman. And it was interesting to read sort of how it was written from a New York Times, sort of side of things. And it mentioned where you were drug tested after finishing second at the 2011 United States Half Marathon Championships. And on the form that you had to fill out where it listed coach, you wrote the words God. And we obviously talked about your reasoning for going this route, but what type of backlash did you get from people inside the sport and even, I guess, outside the sport who cover the sport when you decided to go in this direction?
You know what? To be honest, I don't even know. One of the things I've always felt throughout my career was really important for me not to read things written about me, because not that you shouldn't take into account, people in your family, your friends. Like obviously, you should care about, their opinion of you to some extent. Like you want to be in the right relationship with them. But my goal is to run for an audience of one, to make one person happy. And so, whether a reporter, what they have to say, I don't want that to be in my mind or in my heart. So I've actually never read anything written about me. I don't watch videos about me, or I'm just
Interesting.
not into that at all.
So when I
So
referenced
I
that
couldn't even
article,
tell
have
you.
you not heard of that before? Or did you obviously knew
Well,
that there was an article written about you, I would assume, right?
yeah, I spent time with Jer, and we did the interview and stuff. So like kind of what kind of stuff's going to come out, or
Sure.
sometimes stuff trickles back to you through parents or friends or whatever. Like, hey, I read this article and it said this, and like I don't care. That doesn't bother me.
Right.
Like it's just more like the principle behind it is what I'm going after. So now stuff like that, it's funny, but it was a very public decision, which if I would have had my way, it wouldn't have been. Like I don't need to be in the public, in the limelight. Like I'm just fine. Like for example, when I'm working out really hard, like I'd rather do it in my gym down in my garage when no one else is around at 5 a.m. in the morning, rather than, in a gym with a bunch of people and everyone's looking at each other and stuff. And I've always just been kind of like that. Like I'm just kind of more of a private person. But when you're the fastest marathoner in America and you make a outside the box decision like I made, it does, make everyone question you, and, is this going to work? Was it a good decision? Like, you're crazy. Like, that that's the kind of thoughts that people are having who don't understand, but that's okay. Like I don't expect, and I've never expected, either fans or just like people who follow the sport to completely, agree with me. Like my goal is not to convince them that I'm right and they're wrong. Like my goal is just to follow God wholeheartedly, and then, hopefully inspire other people to also follow God wholeheartedly, which might look different than how I'm operating and how I'm doing things.
So I want to ask you about your bride, Sarah. You mentioned her earlier. You guys married in 2005, and she's also a professional runner. In many marriages, including mine of almost 18 years, opposites attract. But you guys, you're very much the opposite of opposite, right?
Yeah, oh, it's been so amazing. Like, I feel like we've gotten to be married like for 2 lifetimes already, because as professional athletes, like, we're basically home together all day, every day. So it's like such a blessing to be able to spend that much time together. And so we've just, we've loved that. And she's been such a big support for me throughout the years. And then now it's really fun for me to be able to give back to her. So I'm actually coaching her as she's moving on into marathon distance running and really loving doing the marathon. But yeah, I'm coaching her. I'm her massage therapist, and I'm just trying to, be a loving, supportive husband to her. And then we adopted 4 girls from Ethiopia about a year and a half ago. So we went from 10 years marriage, no kids, to all of a sudden, we're a family of 6, and we have a teenager who's 16 all the way down to a 6-year-old who's in kindergarten. So it's been quite a lifestyle shift for us the last couple of years.
So let's go there. Adoption is something that God is clearly all about in the Bible. He sent his son to allow us to become adopted children of his. In 2015, you mentioned you adopted 4 children. Tell me about the process of deciding to pursue adoption.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because it's kind of the same thing as when I was running, and I talked about not liking running at all, and how God totally changed that for me. Well, it's kind of the same with this. Not that I didn't like adoption, but more like I just never saw it. No one in my family adopted. I wasn't around it, so it just wasn't on my grid. Like, I never thought I would adopt. Like, I was just like, I don't know, I'm just gonna have kids, like the biological kids, like everyone else does.
Right.
But when Sarah and I started dating, she started to tell me, like, ever since I was a little girl, like, I would draw pictures of me with all my adopted kids, and they'd be all different, ethnicities, and she'd be the mom of like a bunch of adopted kids. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy. Like, I've never, thought about it or considered it. And then you're right, as you look into Bible and scripture, you're like, wow, like, there is no better way to understand God's love for us than to go through that same adoption process. And my heart has grown so much. Just, you learn so much in the process. Like, for example, how aggressively God is going after each one of us as adopted children of God before we come to him. Like, he is actively pursuing us. Like, when I was adopting my kids, I had to fill out a mountain of paperwork. I had to do all these meetings with social workers, doctors, appointments, visits. We poured a lot of our finances that we had saved over the years into the adoption. So there's a physical price, but then there's also this huge amount of energy and work that goes into going after your kids and adopting them, bringing them home. And you're always dreaming about the day. You're like, man, I can't wait till we drive up our driveway for the first day, the first time they're home, and we're all together as a family. Like, I can't wait. Like, the anticipation of that makes the wait very hard and seem very long. And I think God must be the same way with each one of us, like, it doesn't matter if you're 80 years old or if you're 30 years old. Like, he has that same anticipation. He's like, man, like, I'm going after them. I can't wait for the day that they choose me and we can become family and come home for the first time.
But you come home with 4 kids, so you go from just you and your wife to suddenly a house full of 6. Like, I have one child, a daughter who's almost 13 years old, and I think I can't imagine going from 1 to 4, much less 0 to 4, just at that moment. So take us into that world, and just as a parent, suddenly you're a brand new parent, but it's not just a parent of one. You got 4 here, and they're varying in ages and sizes and everything.
Yeah. Well, I always tell people, it's like, well, I don't know what it's like to have one kid. So for me, my normal is just 4 kids, and there's something to be said for that. You establish your normal, and you establish it in every area of life. Like, I remember when I was training, like, I had to run like 10 to 15 miles a day, or else I didn't even like think of that as a day of actual training, so that was just my normal. And the same thing now. It's just like, you just adjust, and very quickly. You have to adjust quickly to that new normal. But it's been such a blessing for us. Like, our kids they're so amazing, and they've poured so much into our life and blessed us so much. And now our house is full of love. But I'm learning too, like it's really important for me, and I learned this in my running career, to have grace for my failures. Just knowing, like before I brought him home, I was like, I'm not going to be a perfect dad. I'm not going to try to be a perfect dad. Like I know I'm going to fail at this, but I know I'm going to get back up. I know I'm going to learn from my mistakes, and I'm going to get better. So, I try and tell my kids that too. Like, we're both growing up. Like, it's not like I got everything figured out and you don't. Like, we're both going through this process together. So, just, I have to have a lot of grace for myself to go through those failures and pick myself back up and try and do a better job the next day.
What's the one thing you've learned just in this short time, as in a year and a half or so as a dad? What's the one thing that you've learned in this process of adopting 4 children and becoming a dad?
I think just the importance of spending time with your kids. Like I heard it, I think on the radio the other day that, kids spell love Time. And I really feel like that is so true. Like just being present with my kids, like I've had to train myself to put my phone down and when I'm there and I'm home with my kids, actually being there and not being distracted. Because I find that, I have a lot going on, even though I am retired. Still have a lot of other kind of business things going on, and it's easy to become distracted.
So let's talk about Hall Steps and the Hall Steps Foundation. You guys formed that, you and your wife, in 2009. Tell us about the reason behind forming it and kind of what its goals are.
Yeah, so we formed it actually as a part of fulfilling that vision that I had when I was 13, and God told me I'd give me a gift to run with the best guys in the world. But I gave you that gift so you can help other people. We started to learn after college, and even in college, like I started a Bible study, and I could see how through sports we can touch other people's lives and bring love into their life and change their life in a positive way. But I also knew there was more, and so we started doing projects with World Vision. And one year we brought clean water to a community of 90,000 people in Zambia as a result of a whole bunch of us running for Team World Vision in the Chicago Marathon one year. And I remember going into Zambia right after Beijing Olympics, actually, and standing in. They were cutting the ribbon, opening up this new borehole that was bringing clean water to him. And I was just standing next to a normal villager, and he's like, because you guys did this, you brought clean water to us. Now the average life expectancy in my village is going to go up by 10 years.
Wow.
And so I was just thinking, how incredible is that we can run a race, and yeah, we're raising money and contacting, friends and family to support us and all that, but ultimately we're running a race, and that's going to bring extra years, 10 years to every person's life in this 90,000 people. Think about how many years of life are being brought to these people through running. So it was just super inspiring, and we just wanted to do more. So we started the Hall Steps Foundation. We still do work with World Vision and clean water, and but we also do stuff with healthcare and all the different areas in our world where that are issues of poverty that we're facing. I see poverty as something that we can fix in our lifetime. Like I really believe that, but it's going to take a lot of people getting up and taking one step towards that. And when you're running a marathon, you put in literally 500,000 steps to train for one race. And it's like one step doesn't seem to do anything, but if you don't take that one step, you're not getting any closer to the 500,000 that you need. So that's why we named it the Steps Foundation, because we really feel like we all get in there, we do a little bit, we can see this thing end.
That's great. Great job there. I love it. Hall Steps Foundation. Is it right? Is that the website, hallstepsfoundation.com? How can people get involved?
Yeah, the hallstepsfoundation.org.
.org. Got it. Last question on the podcast. We ask this to all of our guests. What right now is God teaching you? What are you learning from the Lord right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like God's just teaching me a lot about patience. Patience in like all areas of life, because like my wife and I, we really want to go to Ethiopia and do some type of development work. And we're actually going to be there this entire summer, taking steps towards that. But I feel like he's teaching me, okay, like it's good that you have that vision, but now you need to have patience in the process of getting there. Like there's a healthy way to go about doing that where you're taking the appropriate steps, and I'm preparing you along the way for that vision that you do have. So I think I'd say patience is kind of a big thing God's been teaching me.
That's awesome. Listen, this has been a treat to talk to you, Ryan Hall. He's in a 2008, 2012 Olympic long distance runner, the fastest American marathoner ever. Ryan, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Really great to have Ryan Hall here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. 2008 and 2012 Olympic long distance runner. His story is really a great one to hear. And we welcome in Raymond St. Martin, the Director of Digital and Media from Sports Spectrum and The Increase. And Raymond, I just loved his story, his desire, his drive, his determination, his faith in Jesus to kind of guide him through his running career. It was really just a cool story to hear.
Yeah, it's amazing to think that you can get a vision while you're running around a lake when you're 14, and you can complete that vision, after this whole trip of being a runner at Stanford and overcoming the injuries and then going to the Olympics and then getting rid of your coach and just following Jesus, like who in Ryan's mind gave him the vision to begin becoming a long distance runner in the first place. And then to not finish your career and not end it the way that you imagined by laying down your shoes at the end of the finish line of a huge marathon, but to end it the way that God intended it to end by running 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days and serving the Dream Center and raising awareness for people in need, and then laying down his shoes and moving into this world of ministry. It was really, that's what stood out to me is, as we have our plans laid out, and even if it could be so fortunate as to be on an Olympic track in our life, like we're so good at something that our life is laid out in front of us at the highest possible level, and we say, this is how it's going to end. I'm going to predict my ending and my finishing of my career, and it doesn't happen. You have a life transition, but in the background, it's still happening. And I think that Ryan was fortunate enough to be able to realize that, and truly end what began when he was a kid is amazing.
Well, it's what trust is all about, too. Trusting in God, trusting in Jesus, because, it says clearly in the Bible, my ways are not your ways, my plans are not your plans. And we, as human beings, often try to make these plans and predict our future and want things to kind of go smoothly and perfect. And usually that doesn't work that way. And it's clear, even in Jeremiah 29:11, which is one of the most popular verses in the Bible. I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you a hope and a future. But he knows the plans. I mean, that's what God is saying right there in his word, is he knows the plans he has for us, and he wants us to prosper. He wants us to have a hope, to have a future. And it's when we fully put our trust in him, and honestly, when we step out of our own comfort zone and step out of our own sort of world and into his, that's when amazing things can happen. And I really thought Ryan's story was a good example of that, when he didn't finish the way he wanted to, but then he stepped out from his world to just serve and to raise money for the Dream Center and to run a ridiculous 7 marathons in 7 days in 7 continents. And he saw the way God had perfectly planned it for him. It's just really, really awesome to watch.
And his fractured hip, day 5. Like, I'm sorry, bro. If I stub my toe, I'm not going to even walk a mile.
Exactly.
Let alone fracture my hip and run 2 more marathons in 2 more days.
That's service, man. That is service and helping others. That's for sure. Now, Ryan's story, by the way, is featured in the latest edition of Sports Spectrum magazine, which is out now. It's the summer edition. And Raymond, I know you've been really working hard and getting this magazine ready to go. And Ryan's story is featured in it. And there's a really, just a lot of cool stuff in this latest edition of the magazine. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, this edition of the magazine we put together as a summer issue. First, we caught up with Dave Javecki, the pitcher from the San Francisco Giants back in 1990. You might be familiar with his story. If you're our age, if you're younger, he overcame cancer, made it all the way back, to the mound, and had just a devastating injury on the mound. Um, and over time, he's grown so much closer to Jesus through his injury, and he's overcome so much. And he shares that with us. What happened after 1990? What happened after you left the game? That
Hmm.
was a great catch up. And obviously, Steph Curry and Kevin Durant and Andre Iguodala, three brothers in Christ that met 7 years ago and hung out at the World Championships in Turkey. We're able to tell a bit of that story, paint a little color within the lines of what happened in this year's Warriors championship team. It was amazing to write about that and to be able to witness that go down.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were able to catch up with Andy Lopez, the two-time winning College World Series manager. I was able to catch up with him and talk a little College World Series, but also what he looks for. What does he look for when he's recruiting? What does he look for? What is the most important thing to him when he starts to plan a roster? And then we caught up with a great AAU coach, Joe Fuca, who's carrying on the legend of Coach Wooden, who is continuing to pour into the lives of kids and has created this amazing AAU program out of Northern California called the Lake Show. Just absolutely incredible. You, Jason, sat down with Ernie Johnson
I
for
did.
the podcast, and we were able to take that and put some of that into an article and a sit-down interview style. So if you enjoyed the Ernie Johnson podcast and you want to read it, you want to see a little bit of a different take on it, we have the Ernie Johnson story in there. We also have a story of our NFL athletes going on a trip with Food for the Hungry down into Haiti for the first time and experiencing what it's like to really witness poverty. If you've never been on a mission trip, if you've never been out of this country, if you've never gone to open your heart to others that are in need in this world, this article might have something for you. You have to think about NFL players leaving behind, taking the risk. We have some mission trips scheduled down there for next year, and it's amazing how many people back up because they're afraid of Zika. You know, don't let the threat of Zika scare you or stop you from going on these trips. There's always something trying to stop you, and these couples went down together, and it was a great thing to witness that they got more out of giving than they believe even the people they were giving to got out of receiving their gifts.
That's awesome. And the magazine, obviously, the way to get it is through subscription, through applying on sportspectrum.com. It's $36 for a year. But you don't just get the magazine, and you get obviously 4 magazines there, but you get all the content from all of the archives, the old stories going back to like the late 80s and early 90s is how far back Sports Spectrum's archives go. And plus, you get all of the content and help provide all of the content that we can give to you, including the podcast and all of the articles and keeping the website going. That's all part of the opportunity to partner with us and to become a member of Sports Spectrum for $36 for 1 year. And I just think it's a great deal, Raymond. And it's an opportunity, not just a deal to give people, but it's an opportunity to partner and be a part of what we're doing here with Sports Spectrum.
Yeah, and I mean, like in this magazine, for example, we're trying to share with you, some new ways to connect to our Creator, new ways to connect with God in the summertime. We created a whole summer Connect with God section that points out some of the places that us, our staff, that Ryan Hall himself, and that also Paige Clausen, the world famous rock climber, where
Yeah.
they go to connect with God in nature. And we hope that when you get this magazine, you read it, you pray over it, like, God, like, where should I go? Like, let me get outside and witness your creation and connect to you and get away from the noise, get away from the city, get away from all these distractions, and just be connected to you. So that was our big motivation behind creating our outdoor section
Yeah.
this time. And we went a little, off the track. We didn't. It's not just football, baseball, basketball, soccer, hockey. I mean, we have a story from Paige Clausen about how she discovered her passion for rock climbing. And Paige Clausen is an amazing young Christian woman who spends more time on the rock face than she does on the couch. It's like
Yeah.
she gets out there and gets after it. We have a focus on Faith RX, which is this great movement within CrossFit. A story for any of you CrossFitters out there to read about how Faith RX began in this movement of people that pray before every CrossFit match. And then if you're training or you're an athlete, a current athlete, or you even just worked out or you're facing something in life, one of our producers, Elise Willard, had this great idea to create a tear out page for training verses that help you get over things, help you deal with being injured or inspire you before a race, something you could tear out and take with you. We've also, on the tear out section, for anyone out there that is younger and listening, or if you're older and you remember the days of tearing posters out of your magazine and putting them on your wall and being surrounded by that, we have a great tear out of Kevin Durant just making an incredible dunk, and another great tear out with we're calling these the Sports Spectrum tear outs, and they have verses on them with an inspiring photo that you could take, rip it out, put it on your wall, put it in your locker, frame it, put it on your desk, whatever it is, if it inspires you. We're really trying to create this medium of photographs and content and words to be inspirational to us throughout the days, throughout the years to come. And it concludes, as we've begun to conclude all of these magazines, with the final 30 pages being dedicated to a devotional that's been written by pro athletes and pro chaplains. It's a daily devotional that's continuing what we started in April and continuing to tell that keep that devotional going throughout the summertime. And then it ends with chaplains just giving a message to each of you on different messages that have affected them over time and over their lives, and hope that it'll reach you. And then concludes completely with our Tenets of Faith section, where we're talking about engaging with God's word, praying, discipling, and being a servant leader, but all from the athletes themselves. This is from Todd Peterson and Daniel Murphy and Demario Davis. These are professional athletes that are pretty big right now. Like, you have Daniel Murphy, who's second in the league in hitting. Probably by today he could be first again. Yeah. Taking the time to really use his platform to reach you and to share with you, what he believes about praying. Like, what does praying mean? What does it mean to be a servant leader? What does it mean to be discipled and to disciple others? So we really hope that this magazine entertains you and informs you, but more than that, we hope that it really equips you in your life. It gives you another tool. It gives you something that wakens something inside of you, and that helps you connect to our Creator, to God, and to Jesus directly. And we do encourage you, when you're done reading this or you're done with this version, give it away. Pass it on to somebody. If you know someone that would like this, invite them to do this with you. Invite them to do the devotionals with you. Reach out to us, and we'll help get them a copy. I mean, whatever we can do to help you start doing life better with your friends, that's really what the hope and the heart is behind everything that we do at Sports Spectrum.
Completely. And I would echo that with the podcast, with the website, and all the content that we're putting there. Tell your friends, tell people about it, and let them know, because I think this is still just on the cutting edge of getting out there and really being a place that people can not only just be inspired or hear great stories of sports, but connecting through the lens of Jesus Christ, who died for all of us. I mean, what a great way to be a witness for him through the lens of Sports Spectrum. And I would also say, Raymond, as the magazine, as you mentioned it, I just found it, I've found it to be a great resource at youth groups. And I know a lot of people who are connected in churches listen to this podcast, pastors and just people who attend church weekly. And it's such a unique and cool way. I found this yesterday just myself. I brought a couple issues of the previous magazine with Matt Holliday on the cover, and I gave them out to some teenagers, and they looked at it and they were like, "Oh, cool, it's Matt Holliday, it's baseball." And I'm like, keep reading now, keep reading, because it's not just Matt Holliday. It's a great way for these kids to be inspired and to hear stories from these people that they watch and root for every single week or every single day on the field, and hear them talk about what Jesus is doing in their lives. And that's a great way to connect to the youth. And so I highly recommend, if you're in a church and you want to, find a unique way to really reach the teens who love sports and are in church, is to think about Sports Spectrum magazine and subscribing to that and handing that out and giving it to them. And just a great witness tool and a great opportunity to share just what Jesus is doing in the lives of our athletes that we watch every day.
Absolutely.
Raymond, thank you. And thank you all listening right now. We appreciate you so much, and we hope you continue to tune in and tell others about what we're trying to do here with Sports Spectrum and making the name of Jesus known to as many people that will listen. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time on the Sports Spectrum Podcast.